Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you and the mercy of Allah and His blessings. My name is Lester, and I know I look spongy, but I have issues, and I keep thinking, well, I'm going to cut my hair and trim my beard and all of this, and somehow it just never gets done. And so better to get this presentation done than to look, as my dad would say, presentable. But Allah willing, one day you'll look at me and say, "Who is that?" Okay, and okay. Um, this is a continuation of word to word. 12 differences between the Bible and the Quran, comparative study of the Bible and the Quran. After I get past number 12, I don't actually have a plan, but Allah willing, I will continue to discuss this very important. Uh, and maybe I should begin with a digression. We live in a nation that most of the people call themselves Christians and supposedly live and govern their affairs according to that and call the Bible the Word of God. And so, supposedly, what is happening, if most of the people are Christians, what is happening in our nation, what has happened in the past, and what is happening right now, okay, is an expression of the hearts and minds, the faith of the people who constitute the majority of this nation. And that is something to reflect upon because we know that we would not be here, none of us, if people had not crossed the ocean and come here from Europe and exterminated the people who were here and took their land and then brought millions of people from other countries across the ocean, enslaved them. And you may not be aware of this, but it would not have been possible for the Europeans to settle and conquer this land without the African captives. If you read the history of Jamestown, the first successful European, English settlement in North America, it's an embarrassment to those people. Um, and it was terrible until the African captives were brought in 1619. So between 1607 and 1619, it was a terrible disaster. Um, I won't go into it. Terrible, terrible. Well, I'll mention one thing. A man's wife died, and he got hungry and dug her body up and ate it. That was not the only instance of cannibalism. Um, the first African captives arrived in 1619, uh, and by 1625 the colony was thriving. Okay, and the Africans were brought from civilized nations, regardless of what history you may have been taught. And let me just show you this for a moment. This is a book called Tariq al-Fattah. It was written about 400 years ago, 500 years ago, um, by a man, a scholar, one of the writers of Timbuktu. You know, Timbuktu is in the middle of Africa, of West Africa. It's in Mali, where Mali is today. Well, there was an empire called Mali before that, and then there was an empire called Songhai, which succeeded the Mali Empire, and and now there's a nation called Mali, and I know someone whose father was from Mali, and I believe he's a distant cousin of mine. But extended families, we don't understand that in this country. Um, but this author, uh, my memory is shot really. Uh, Mahmoud Kati. Um, it is said that he lived 125 years. And this book was continued by his sons and grandsons. It's a history of West Africa, written 500 years ago. And when I studied African history at Harvard, the professor, one of the progressive professors, young progressive professor, said that Africans did not write their own history. And I have a book that was just recently translated from Arabic. Arabic was a language of scholarship. You know, just like in Western Europe, Latin was the language, and among Muslims, all the way from what is now Senegal to what is now the Philippines, all the way across that, across Central Asia, India, all of that, East Africa, North Africa, scholars wrote in Arabic. Okay, um, and so Mahmoud Kati, a black African, we would say, wrote a history of West Africa at his time, you know, when he was living 500 years ago, um, and was just recently translated into English. And so the African came from countries that were clean. The Scottish explorer Mungo Park traveled freely in West Africa and found no poor people. West Africa, okay? No poor people. Free schools for the young people. This was West Africa in 1799, okay? It was clean, uh, not disease ridden the way Europe was. I mean, all the way into the 19th century, Europe was a mess. There was an event. You can look it up on Wikipedia. You can probably find it under this name, the Great Stench. The Great Stench. Um, about London, okay? And this was in the 19th century. But even in the 20th century, the pollution, the Europeans came here and reproduced the same conditions that they were escaping from in Europe. The Cuyahoga River caught fire, so polluted it caught fire, right? Um, Terrible, terrible. But Africans were brought here, the captives were brought here from civilized nations, okay? Men and women who could read and write. Mostly the men, the education of women was not the same as it should have been. Um, and there were 100 nations where 100% of the men were literate in Arabic, not only in writing their own languages had writing systems too. If they didn't use the Arabic writing system to write their own language, they had like the Mali. For some reason, the Mali and the Mandinka people had their own writing system. And there are inscriptions carved into rocks in Arizona. There was a mission that went across the Atlantic Ocean and all the way up Central America and got at least as far as Arizona. And so I read the elephants got irritable, you know, like, where are we going? When they reached Arizona. But at any rate, there's a lot of history you don't know. Okay. But at any rate, the African captives were brought here from civilized nations, and the Europeans were fleeing all the way into the beginning of the 20th century, fleeing from terrible conditions in Europe. Okay, that's why they came here. The Africans knew this place was here. Okay. So anyway, I know I've gone on, and my topic right now is number 9. The Bible is read in translation, and the Quran is read in its original language. I don't know how I got all the way into that, but Allah is the best planner. Let me read this to you. Okay. Um, the King James Bible is a translation. Almost nobody in America even thinks of reading the Bible in Hebrew or Greek. In fact, many people do not even realize that the King James Bible, like every other English language Bible, is a translation. They seem to think that Jesus Christ and all of the ancient prophets spoke King James English. Many Americans are unaware that the English language did not exist 700 years ago, and that many modern European languages, along with some languages in other parts of the world, are new. Languages come and go like nations and tribes. Okay. People have been reading the Bible in translation for more than 2,000 years, but the number of different languages into which the scriptures have been translated did not expand much until the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. By 1450, there were 33 translations of the Bible. By the beginning of the 19th century, there were 71 translations. Today, the Bible is available in translations into hundreds of languages. Hundreds. Translation changes the message. Italians say traduttori, traduttori. Sounds like the same word repeated twice. That's why it's so catching. Traduttori, traduttori. Traduttori means translators, and traditori means traders. Traduttori, traditori. Translators are traders. You cannot translate from one language to another without changing the meaning. Okay? Benjamin Lee Whorf, an unusually perceptive scholar of languages, that's WHORF, right? That's an American scholar, uh, an unusually perceptive scholar of languages, observed that all higher levels of thinking are dependent on language. The structure of the language one habitually uses influences the manner in which one understands his environment. The picture of the universe shifts from tongue to tongue. Okay, so at any rate, that's in the book Language, Thought, and Reality in the foreword. Uh, okay, Muslims read the Quran in its original language. It is stated repeatedly in the Quran that it is an Arabic Qur'an. So that reading the Quran in any other language leads to a contradictory statement. This is Arabic, and you are reading English or some other language. It says in the Quran, quote, surely we have made the Quran easy to understand and remember. That's in the surah entitled Al-Qamar, which is the 54th surah, 54th surah, and the verses 17, 22, 32, and 40. It's a refrain. It comes back again and again. Um, Millions of Muslims have discovered that learning to read the Arabic Quran is not difficult. It is not just for the scholars. Um, so that's number 9. A few things I want to comment on um, that went past me and I didn't want to stop reading. Um, One of the, let me go to one thing. Um, there's a movie out right now. You know, if you haven't seen it, I'm not recommending or disrecommending it. It's called Sinners, right? And you know, mostly about African Americans in the South in the 1920s, I believe, 1920s, 1930s. And in a sense, it's a vampire movie, right? There are vampires in it, and so there's a question because there's a blues guitarist, singer, guitarist, you know, in it, who's one of the characters in this movie. You may know the story of I think Robert Johnson, who's said to have sold his soul to the devil because he was a so-so blues singer guitarist, and then he disappeared for a couple of years, and when he came back, he had all of this talent, right? And you know, my best friend Solomon said it's so obvious. He was woodshedding. You know, woodshedding is what jazz musicians use when a musician goes off by himself and just practices and practices and practices and practices. I mean, you know, I mean, this is a sensitive issue for me because, you know, I will tell you unashamedly, I went to Harvard University. I was admitted to Harvard at the age of 16 as a Harvard National Scholar, one of the 50 top freshmen in a admitting class of 1,200. But this didn't come out of the blue. That whole business of IQ, like you're just born smart and all of that kind of stuff. No, that's ridiculous. I have a what some people would call a sleeping disorder. I had it from childhood all the way at least until 1995, but I was 50 years old thereabouts. And then something happened, which I considered a sleeping disorder. I started sleeping too much, but I was sleeping 5 hours a night. I had to learn that other people did not want to get up at 3 a.m., right? Even the cat looked at me funny, so I knew leave the cat alone, right? So when I built a tent over my bed, right, because my brother slept on the top bunk, and I put a light under there, and I was reading. So you multiply that, okay? Instead of sleeping 8 hours, I was sleeping 5 hours. That's 3 extra hours a day. I was reading, and then later on, I was practicing the piano. I was studying how to compose serious music. I had 1,000 extra hours a year to do all of this. So by the time I reached junior high school, I went to junior high school with Jewish people, and you should not try to keep secrets from Jewish people. They're very sensitive about that. Don't keep secrets. Don't have things hidden from them. And they weren't supposed to tell us what our IQ scores were, right? And they were, I guess they were, they looked at me, and they saw my IQ score was over 150, right? uh but the thing is, this is like lifting weights. This is like lifting weights. You aren't born with muscles. You get muscles by lifting weights. And the same thing with the development of your mind, right? Develop your mind. Okay. So anyway, and I don't remember how, I got off on that, but he sold his soul. Oh yeah, he was woodshedding, right? Because that's how he didn't sell his soul to the devil. He was practicing, he was working, he was developing his skills. Okay. So anyway, but this idea of selling your soul to the devil, this is a language problem. And it's a reality problem. Language, thought, and reality is the title of the book, right? Okay. You have a word in the Quran, right? Nafs, nafs. Uh, it's impossible to translate it into English uh, because it's a common, ordinary word that we use in English. We say self. I did this myself. I saw this myself, right? Um, common, simple. But the word means soul. It doesn't mean nafs and soul. It doesn't mean nafs, excuse me, it doesn't mean self and soul. It doesn't mean self or soul. Self and soul are one and the same word in the Arabic Qur'an, right? So when you say nafs, like when you die, what goes into the next life? Your nafs, but in English we say your soul, right? Okay. So anyway, so somebody says he sold his soul to the devil. I mean, what does that mean, right? If you accept the reality of the Arabic Quran, that expression has no sensible meaning whatsoever, because there's no distinction between soul and self. And there are learned men in India, especially, not even people who call themselves Muslim or read the Quran, who will say, you are a soul. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. This is who and what you are. Okay. So they have this idea, you have this entire movie centers, at least, according to what I've read, at least 20% of the captives here from Africa were Muslims. Okay, were Muslims. I have the names of several of them with, biographical information. A man who was called Prince by the man who purchased him. His name was Abdul Rahman. Abdul Rahman, the son of Ibrahim Sori. His family name was Sori. His father was the ruler of Futajalon. Okay, you talk about being the sons of kings and queens. Okay, his father, he was a prince. He actually was a prince, but his slave, the man who purchased him, was mocking him. He didn't realize until later that the man was actually a prince. Um, and So, he was a slave in Mississippi territory. And then this movie is set in Mississippi territory. Okay. I have the names of others. Humayun Syed, who was in the Fayetteville area. I brought the knowledge, information about this man to the Muslims in Fayetteville, and they named their masjid after him. And they actually not even realize it was me. I did it. I brought that information to them. Okay, well, Allah knows. There was Bilal Muhammad, who left behind what they thought was a diary. He was trying to write out a law book. He was a law student. Okay, well, to go back to Umar ibn Said, he was a scholar. He had the equivalent of a doctorate in education. I don't know what his field was, but he was a learned man by the time he was captured. Um, Bilal Muhammad was a law student. Um, and Ayyub ibn Sulaiman, his first name means Job, and the son of Solomon, right? And he became known as Job bin Solomon in England. He There's a book about him called The Fortunate Slave. I don't believe I've actually read the book, but his biography is amazing. Oh, to get back to Abdul Rahman, who was, there's a video called Prince Among Slaves. It's also a book, Prince Among Slaves. I recommend that you watch this video, Prince Among Slaves, about Abdul Rahman, who was a captive and a slave, I think for might have been 40 years in Mississippi Territory. Um, and and then there's a book, this book about Ayub ibn Sulaiman, who was ransomed and wound up in England, helped to establish the British Museum, the Arabic section of the British Museum. He had memorized the entire Quran, which was not as common as you might think. And he managed to get home to his actual village where he was from, the only one that I know of specifically to have actually returned home. But Ayub Sulaiman, he was a slave on Kent Island in Maryland. Um, I could name others, but this movie, Sinners, did not mention Muslims or Islam, and yet Muslims and Islam are an essential part of the history, and I mean specifically African Muslims are an essential part of the history of Europe and of the United States and of the world. It was, the whole Reconquista, the effort of the Catholic monarchs to conquer Spain from the Muslims. Um, they were black Muslims. The Moors were black Africans, and the Arabs were black people, because Arabs were black people 14 centuries ago. So anyway, I've talked for over 20 minutes and only touched on this subject. Let me just leave you with just a little bit. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. I seek refuge with Allah from the rejected Satan. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. With the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. والمرسلات عرفا فالعاصفات عصفا والناشرات نشرا فالفارقات فرقا عذرا أو نذرا إنما توعدون لواقع. Surely Allah speaks the truth. I'm not going to attempt a translation. It can't be translated. But the main reason I recited this to you is the rhythm and rhyme. Da 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 da. That rhythm is built into the language. Arabic is a rhythmic language. You cannot translate the rhythms. The meaning of the words is at least in part not only the consonants and vowels but the rhythm as well. Okay. And that particular rhythm, repeated over and over at the beginning of this surah and 4 other surahs, is the same rhythm as the rhythm that the African captives brought with them from Africa to Cuba, and then from there it went to the world. It's an ancient rhythm, and I'm sure, I could be wrong. I'm sure it existed long before the Quran came down to Muhammad. But this rhythm is a part of the Quran, and there are other rhythms. If you're familiar with Arabic poetry, which I'm not, but you could, I've read that you can find the rhythms of Arabic poetry in the Quran, and all kinds of, structures. I mean, the riffs, a call and response, refrains, the symphonic structure of the Quran, I call it. But at any rate, you can't translate that. You can't translate the rhymes. It's magnificent. But mashallah, Allah knows best. And our next subject is number 10. The Bible is read in different languages around the world. The Quran is read in one language worldwide. Okay, and that has profound historical implications. Okay, so inshallah we will continue this subject. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.